Well, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our session 2. That's Incubators Perspective on Technology Adoption and Challenges. We have two chairpersons for this session. Mr. Sameer Mehta, the Vice President of CAHO, is a very known personality and a good friend. Mr. Mehta is the Chief Investment Director of the Atlas Family Office and the Vice Chairman of Dr. Mehta's Hospitals in Chennai. Sameer is the co-founder of a number of entities, including India Home Healthcare, Ardya Play Games, Atlas Intelligence, and participates on various national healthcare and investment advisory committees. He is the member of the Institute of Directors, the Indus Entrepreneurs and Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. We have our next chairperson, who is Mr. Avinash Aradhya, who is a second-generation family business entrepreneur inspired to contribute to improving healthcare. He co-founded Health Minds to work with artificial intelligence, AI, medtech, and pharma companies with research and data analytics, medical writing and communications, clinical data management, validations, trials, and pharmacovigilance. He is an engineer alumnus of the Purdue University. Mainly dealing with artificial intelligence and social impact projects is where his key areas of interest are. I will go ahead to introduce the speakers also before I hand over to our chairpersons. Professor Ravi Bhallamudi is the Institute Chair Professor, Mechanical Engineering, Head, Desai City School of Entrepreneurship, IIT, Mumbai. He is the Honorary Adjunct Professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, Fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering, and the Abdul Kalam Technology Innovation National Fellow. He has also shared his knowledge through 260 technical papers, 300 invited talks, and 75 training programs. And for this, I hand over to the chairpersons of this session. Over to you, Sam and Avinash.
Thanks, Anna. I think we've been looking forward to CAHOTECH for a long time, and I so wish we could have done it in person, but that's not the case this year. The reason we're sitting here today is so that our tomorrows are better than our yesterdays. And I think in many ways, this specific session is a testament for that. We would not have had this if you rewind the clock 80 years ago when Dr. Mehta's was set up in 1933. We didn't have incubators. We didn't have the concept of accelerators. In fact, if you even look at 10 years back, we didn't have too many in the health technology space. I think the first one at IIT Madras and perhaps IIT Bombay and Delhi were starting to see their earliest days. And I think the reason we're doing that is the reality is in most industries, startups and making an entrepreneurial success of any venture is tough. They say over 50% fail within the first 5 to 10 years. The reality, I think, personally in healthcare is that we'll be lucky to see 20% succeed. And that's why I think having these accelerators and incubators to help us with those earliest of steps, the highest of riskiest of steps, makes a big difference. And especially in technology ventures that are related to health, because whether you're doing B2C, going directly to consumers, trying to do a platform, whether it's telemedicine, whether it's some sort of health booking, whether it's some pharma or drug management system, or even ordering, those are areas where you need to understand your customer, make sure your user experience is well met. When you start going B2B, either selling to hospitals or clinics or doctors, right? That's a very different beast. In India, we may have 80,000 hospitals on paper. We may have 30,000 registered with insurance companies. But the reality is India has some maybe 10,000 hospitals with some sort of recognized leadership team. If you look at beyond that, which have IT departments, you're starting to go divided, right? So it comes down to around 3,000. Navigating these weird pathways needs help. And that's why we have 3 wonderful speakers. We have folks who are deep in medtech. We have folks who are deep in digital health. And more importantly, we have folks who do a combination of B2B and B2C. And I think that melding together of these different components in the early phase of a life of any venture helps. And I think with that, let me pass it to Avinash, and perhaps he'll give a little bit more glamour to it, and then we'll allow our speakers to come and add some spice to the day and make our tomorrows better.
Thank you, Sam. So it's with the same spirit that we were, talking about that to assist the startups, in their initial days. CAHO has also set up the technology committee and to help and engage with incubators and startups in engaging with hospitals, whether it is with proof of concepts or in helping them reach out to all the hospitals at large. I'm a new member to CAHO, and it has been a very exciting journey for me as well to learn about the organization and with the energy and the spirit with which they're working. And please, Professor Ravi, I enjoyed talking to you, and I heard you talking about the broad context, and I really would like your input on introducing us to what you're doing, but more also to paint the landscape as to what is happening in India and the world, particularly at IITs.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Avinash, sorry. And of course, a big thank you to CAHOTECH team. I think very privileged to be talking to all of you. It's a fantastic association. I think I can see, and Avinash, we were talking yesterday about the triple helix. We all talk about the government and academia and industry coming together, and we are thinking about the fourth element, the public or society, or in this case, hospitals have to be very much part of that. But I think overall context, I'm very excited that at this point of time, we are seeing some great moves from the government as well. I think the budget, if you all noticed, I think healthcare budget has been now almost doubled from below, I think 1 billion to more than 2 billion. And what is even more exciting for people like us is that the total number of patents filed in India, okay, if computer technology is 10%, healthcare technology, health, medtech, biotech are also 10%, equal to computer technologies. So Sam, I hope you believe that, okay? So I think if you're talking about IT and healthcare, it's just like very powerful combination. So what I'm trying to say is, and my heart beats for India, I'm looking at Indian medtech industry. And I think at this point of time, Muthu knows, I know, all these startups are struggling to meet the quality of the Western MNCs or the cost competitiveness of the Eastern countries. But if you go to customers, and let's say hospitals or doctors or patients, they always want better features, novel features, more affordable, a faster learning curve, and so on. And at this point of time, if you look at all these, you can say information technologies in one basket, where it is medical imaging or AI ML, or it is cloud or IoT or sensors, AR, VR, I think this is giving us a fantastic opportunity to think about designed in India and manufactured in India products. The issue there is that we also have to recognize that we need to get people together. I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't understand necessarily the language of the medicine, okay? So we need people who can translate, you can connect people like that. Then we can do all the way from, this innovation ecosystem. I have also seen firsthand, I have been an innovator and a translator for the last almost 30 years. I have seen that researchers like me and academicians like me are very happy doing research in the labs. Very few of us will go one step forward and build a prototype and maybe file a patent, but that's about it. Very, very few people will cross the third valley of death and saying, let me make a marketable or commercially viable product. If you cross the third valley of death, the next step is easy because industry knows how to replicate, how to mass produce, how to distribute, and so on. But we need to be able to have these, what I call as technology accelerators. We hear about business incubators and business accelerators all the time, but very few people are talking about technology accelerators to convert what is called as a research prototype into a commercially viable product. And that, if we cross that, I think we are in great shape. Having said that, I just mentioned a triple helix, and then the fourth arm of this, I want to bring hospitals in a big way. That is not enough to build the ecosystem. We also need to bring in my opinion, incubators and testing centers. Medical testing centers is very critical. We have a few testing centers for mechanical testing or biological testing, or maybe electrical safety testing, but not all testings under one roof. And of course, the role of media and investors is also equally critical. Here is one example of what we have been able to do, build a process at IIT Bombay. We call it as a 4D process, where we involve the hospitals or the doctors in the very first stage. We say, we want you to define what is your pain point. And that itself has several steps, like we build an interdisciplinary team. We allow our engineers or biomedical engineers to go sit, immerse in the hospitals. And I can name almost virtually every major hospital in Bombay, Pune, Hyderabad, some in Bangalore, some in Baroda, Ahmedabad, and so on. Very, very thankful to those hospitals and the doctors who have done that. Then the engineers or researchers come into picture. They will do design and prototyping and basic testing and so on. Then you get into the entrepreneurial stage, where industry also comes into picture, and we do pilot manufacturing, a batch of 5-10 products. And then you get into lab preclinical testing, human clinical trials, and certification. And finally, of course, you have to work with maybe investors and hospitals to make sure that the thing actually goes into clinical practice. And here is just I know Sam talked about the failure rates in the whole thing. What we find is, this is a rough number. If you start with 8 ideas, maybe one idea will finally go into the final clinical thing. So you can say 16% or 80% failure, something like that. But it is not really so. The failures at the initial stage are very few. You may have, we have a list of 500 requirements from hospitals. We don't really go through everything. We have our own checkpoints. We take only about, let's say, 100, 200 forward. So does it mean 400 have failed? No, the cost of failure is very low. But if you fail at the last stage, of course, then the cost is very high. So we have to take failure in its own right context. And here is just one simple example of a doctor mentioning a need in one of the training programs that we do. They built a prototype, proof of concept within 4 days. Then they left their jobs, developed a product, prototype, product, and finally it is in the market. This is a module which will convert an ordinary stethoscope into a digital stethoscope. You can now store the data, store your auscultated sounds. You can do noise cancellation. You can enhance the sound. You can visualize it. You can transfer it. You can even do data analytics onto the whole thing, and you can actually figure out what kind of a breathing problem or a heart problem is that. And now they have even a software for doing that. And within this whole journey took about 3.5-4 years period. And in the last 1.5 years, they have sold more than 3,000 units of this all over the country. Many of them in the PHCs for telemedicine, by the way. And that is just one example. So in the last 4 years, we now have an array of products, and all those red words which you see are startup companies emerging from our lab in IIT Bombay. Every one of them have been able to get a angel funding or a seed funding of average 1 crore. And then of course, there are many companies, Indian companies who are coming and saying that you become our R&D center. We can't develop products, but we know the market. Please develop it for us. And many of them are coming back to us multiple times. Last, I want to wrap it by saying that the ecosystem that you're talking about, and I agree with all of you, I just want to say this from our hardcore experience. What we found is one pillar of this, what we call as reinvent ecosystem, research to innovation to entrepreneurship, is one is the interdisciplinary researchers and of course mentors and all those managers and so on, but also the culture of working with multiple kinds of organizations, going out of comfort zones, taking risks and failing, and then coming back from the failures and learning from failures is very critical. Infrastructure we need to build. All these things are kind of in place in the country, but not in one place. And very important is that even for academic institutions to have the kind of quality procedures and vision and the certifications that we have is very, very critical. I'll end by saying that if you ask me, is it possible to do all these things in the country? I say yes, we have done it in IIT Bombay in the BETIC system. And the reason why we have been done is that, and we got fantastic support from every stakeholder, what I mentioned earlier, is because we are very clear that we want to work for that poor patient in the remote town who has no access to transport or money or connections or so and so on and so forth. If you keep the end user at the heart, at the focus of your vision, I think many things fall into place. The only thing that we have not been able to really take care of completely is industrial quality, medical grade, pilot manufacturing to make the 10-20 pieces which are needed for testing and initial samples to doctors and clinical trials and so on. That facility does not exist anywhere in the country. If you go to multiple industries, it's very expensive. And I'm trying to knock on multiple doors to say, can we please help us to create at least one center in each of the zones in the country? One in Bangalore, one in Bombay, Pune, one in NCR, maybe one in Hyderabad, one in Bhubaneswar, maybe. We need these 4 or 5 centers where the innovators can go and just make this initial batch of the products. That's about the pain point. Rest of the things, more or less, we know the same. Even investment is coming up very, very fantastically now. I think healthcare is going to be a very big sunrise industry in the next 2 to 5 years, as I can see that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi.
Great, thank you. And Professor Ravi, can you share with us how the people from our audience can, if they have great ideas, how they can work with organizations such as yours and startups, to come out with solutions?
Yeah, what I'm going to say is not just for our lab, but I think most IITs, IISc Bangalore have centers now which do medical device innovation or medtech innovation in general. If you come back to us, what we do, and most of them also do some kind of events every year. For example, we do 2 events, one called Mehta, which is Medical Device Hackathon, typically in summer, and one called as Medic, which is Medical Device Innovation Camp, which is going to be in October this year. What we do is that we keep collecting the problems from doctors and hospitals, and maybe what I'll do is I'll put in the chat box right after this question the link to where they can post their needs, and it's just a problem definition. You don't have to give your IPR, and we will connect the innovators with the problems. And if someone takes up the problem and wants to go further on to that, we'll connect back to you. And if both of you, the innovator and the hospital or the doctor, want our help to do product development and manufacturing and testing and so on, we are very happy to do that. We have sources of funds from various government and industry and so on and specific things. So that part is not difficult. The difficult part is actually the final clinical trials and the production, where industry and hospitals already are there. And whereas what we are good at in these centers is the basic innovation and product development and basic lab testing and so on. It's a mutually beneficial kind of a thing. It's just a question of, you need to know that we can do that, and I need to know who wants to get some problem solved. Once you get connected, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. This is true for everything else. So HTIC Madras, there are centers like that in IIT Delhi. There's a good center in IIT Hyderabad, Gandhinagar, and so on. So almost every IIT, IISc, now many other centers also, like C Camp in Bangalore. There's a venture center in Pune. These are all funded by the government of India to Department of Biotechnology or BIRAC. There's plenty of action in the thing. We just have to get connected. Not an issue there. The point is that even betting, when we started, I'll tell you, when we started early, about 7 years back, I said, all we'll do is bring doctors and engineers together. That's all my vision was. And just magic happened. Now we position Betic as our lab, Betic as a running partner for anyone who wants to run the marathon of medtech innovation. And just to supplement what Sam and Muthu have said, see, a typical medical device developed in Silicon Valley, let's say in USA, in the West generally, costs anywhere from $50 to $80 million. Of course, much better than a pharmaceutical drug or a molecule. But $50 to $80 million is great. Of course, 80% of that is only in clinical trials. If you remove that part, it is still the cost of a medical device developed in the West is about at least $5 to $10 million. The same thing can be done in India for 1/10 of the cost. But by the time the device goes to the market, you can roughly price it at about anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4, 1/5 sometimes, but definitely less than half of the price for similar features or a better or similar quality level, similar materials, similar quality standards, similar even margins to distributors and so on. So there is a big advantage in joining hands. What I said before, for helix in the beginning, I mentioned that. We need to do that. And there's a lot of scope for that.
I think, Ravi, what you said makes a lot of sense, because our experience, especially working with HTIC, we started one of our first projects about 9 years ago. And if you look at an eICU solution that we'd invested in through HTIC, I think they currently deliver a bed for around $250 per year for a eICU. That includes the equipment that's already there. You don't have to buy a new monitor or components like that. And I think what we are realizing is when we compare that to the Western solution delivered in India, the cheapest alternative solution was over 10 times higher, right? The Philips and GE. And that's not to say Philips and GE are bad, because we just have to educate them that India is a different operating system. And I still remember the days in 2008 and 9 where Philips and Siemens and GE actually made majority of their profits from us. Perhaps they should be a bit kinder to India and charge the guys who can pay those higher profits. Let me take a slightly different thread in this thinking, and also building on what you said. One of the challenges we've seen is the teams that come together to solve problems need to be different in the earliest stage. And you kind of like mentioned that a little, that it's researcher based at the start. It then transitions to somebody who's like a project manager. It then should transition to somebody who thinks in terms of go to market. And then it should transition to somebody who absorbs it into the market. Because in digital health, we're starting to see a pattern of founders connect, right? Health tech, in our opinion, whether it's digital health or whether it's medical devices, seem to need more complex teams to operate and succeed. They're not simple teams. And this is something, we have a lot of entrepreneurs listening and technology companies listening on this call. So that's something we really want them to take away. How do you put together these teams where the entrepreneur groups or the founder groups evolve over time as the maturity of the project gets closer to the market or the customer?
There are three critical points here, and I want to highlight, underline that. One is that although the composition of the team may change, it doesn't have to change drastically. Core team remains constant, but a connecting link is actually doctor. We call it as a bedside to bench to business to bedside. Right from problem identification to problem final solution testing in hospital, doctor is their part of the whole team. In fact, whenever a doctor comes and says that, why I would like you to solve this problem, we tell them, can you give us 1 hour per week? Committed. But for that commitment, we also put the doctor's name in the patent. He's part of the revenue sharing agreement. He can even be the advisor to the company. He has all those benefits as well. But if the doctors are not part of that, then we have a big problem. So that is one golden point which we have used from the beginning. The other point is that the startup teams, although they can get an angel funding of 50 lakh rupees, 1 crore rupees here and there, not so difficult these days. But when it comes to the later part of the journey, especially when you want to do pilot manufacturing, mass production, distribution, and so on, you need tons of money at that point. You're talking about $1 million, $2 million, right? And there we say that unless government comes in some way and creates some common facilities, and I mentioned that already, so I will not repeat that, that can drastically cut down the amount of investment that is required, or the partners that they have to do, or give an arm or a leg as part of the company, when it happens at that point of time. So that's the reason why we still need to get our act together. I think CAHOTECH and the government, and I'm now virtually every government ministry where there's a medtech innovation or review or policy, I'm part of that. So it's not difficult for me to bring the government angle to the whole thing. But I think CAHOTECH and institutions would also work together to create that ecosystem which you're talking about. But startups do need a bit of a help at this point of time.
They say matrimonial sites also matchmake. With relatively mixed success. I'm not sure if the doctor sometimes acts like the mother-in-law or the priest that gives you good advice. Sometimes it's a bit confusing. So on a jest of the day.
So the question that we had was, to help scale all these startups or all these new technologies that are out there. The real question to all the hospitals and the healthcare companies in the ecosystem, I'd like to know, how many of you are actually part of, running clinical trials or, innovation trials, and engaging with all these startups? And what we'd like to leave, as a last note is that the more engaged we are with all these startups and innovation companies, and an opportunity for the doctors to take part in these trials, I think it will speed up the whole ecosystem in terms of coming out with new products and encourage the whole system to be more productive. So with that, Sam, I think you can take it.
I'd like to thank a fantastic panel. I think this was a great session. Avinash, thanks. But on a more serious note, I think for all of you startups out there, I think take advice and take the help of these fantastic accelerators and incubators around the country. And they're now in every part of the country. There are specialists, there are generalists, but there are folks that understand health deeply. Take their help. That's one. For all the doctors and the hospital participants out there, help the startup, right? Because if you don't start at least meeting girls, you'll never get married. Or if you meet boys you will never even meet, understand that the entire male sex is worth spending some time with, right? So on a really serious basis, my suggestion is spend time with folks and learn, be interested, be curious. And I think with that, we hope that you help create a better tomorrow than our yesterdays, right? That's really why we're here in CAHOTECH. And I think with that, thanks a lot. Thanks, wonderful panel.